All right, David Legg, welcome.
Thanks.
Hey,
Yeah, my pleasure.
this is the part where I do an intro, and I don't have much of an intro plan because I think part of the intro is listening to you talk about your past in sport and physical activity and rec. But I wanted to have you on because I have many interactions over the years in different capacities. Uh, Respected a lot of the work that you've done, both at Mount Royal, where you're a professor, but I think in the greater sport physical activity field. And I would say the past couple of years, it's been the most I've worked with you. And I think that was one of those kind of things. It's that bittersweet of moving from Alberta and moving into Ontario. It's like I just felt we were starting to get some good momentum going in Alberta, and excited to see that going. But I want to turn it over to you. So can you tell us a bit more about yourself in your sort of how you're getting to this point? Like, you're a professor now, Mount Royal University. How did you get to that point? Where did it start? And yeah, take it anywhere you want.
Holy cow, that's pretty open-ended. Well, first of all, thank you for asking me to participate in this process. And you're missed in Alberta, so uh, thank you for your kind words, and I would certainly reciprocate those to you. To your question, so I am a professor in the Department of Health and Physical Education. I teach sport management, sport and recreation management, and then also adapted physical activity, which is, probably the connection how you and I know each other through your previous roles with Special Olympics, and mine mostly with Paralympic sport, but more broadly with adapted physical activity. So how did I get here? I guess the short story is as a young boy, I took to sport, physical activity, and recreation. I think it's how I connected to my dad in particular, how he and I developed a relationship and a sense of connection between us was often through physical activity or sport. And then my dad had multiple sclerosis. And so I would say kind of in my early teen years, he was no longer able to participate in playing catch but we would still connect through watching sports, and he watching mine and coming to my games. And, I remember him taking the stats at my high school basketball game, for the whole team, and then sharing that with the coach after and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I think he and I formed a relationship. And I don't think I recognized that at the time or appreciated that at the time, but I think now in retrospect and looking back, that's probably where I developed an appreciation and a value for sport and physical activity and recreation, and then also the disability side of things. So I ended up going to McMaster in Hamilton for a physical education degree, very traditional at the time, wanted to be a high school physical education teacher. Kind of meandered a little bit after that. I ended up doing a master's degree in sport management at Windsor. And I decided at that point, because I had taken a course in my undergraduate called adaptive physical activity, and I had never even really thought about marrying these two kind of complementary now ideas of an interest in disability and an interest in sport and physical education and recreation and stuff like that. And at Windsor, I decided to connect those two dots, and I looked at why somebody would volunteer with a disability sport versus an able-bodied sport. And I have to admit, I didn't really know the system then. And I found out about the wheelchair sport system. And that summer, I went to a number of events and interviewed and had surveys for the volunteers that were there, trying to discern what it was that attracted them to do that. That then led to a job with Ontario Wheelchair Sport in Toronto as a program manager for a couple of years. That then led to a job with the Canadian Wheelchair Sport Association in Ottawa, at the National Sports Centre in Gloucester. And then that then led for me to think about what I wanted to do in the future. And my contract had been a maternity leave replacement. And so the contract was coming up. I knew, that I didn't have a job following that. And I thought, I'm kind of in my late 20s, not married. Maybe this is a chance to travel west and continue with school. I didn't really know at that time that being a professor was what I wanted to do, but I kind of, I don't know, was at a bit of a crossroads, and this seemed like an interesting opportunity. And so I applied to the University of Alberta. It was the only school I applied to. And gratefully and thankfully, they accepted me. And it was Bob Stedward who became my supervisor. And he was the founding president of the International Paralympic Committee. And he would have only been the president for about 4 years at that time when I arrived in Edmonton. And at that stage, the IPC, International Paralympic Committee, had no headquarters, no office, no staff. And so he used his graduate students as basically his assistants. And so immediately I was thrust into this opportunity and this really is quite incredible when you think back to it, to be part of the creation of the IPC. And so he took me as one of his assistants to the games in Atlanta in 1996. And that was the start of kind of my Paralympic trajectory and connection. And met a girl in Edmonton, actually through Dr. Stedward. He was kind of the one who introduced me to her, and she's now my wife. We now have 3 children, and we live in Calgary. She actually took a job in Calgary, so I followed her to Calgary without even knowing about Mount Royal College at the time. And I showed up at their doorstep offering to teach sessionally, and they, again, as serendipity would have it, they had a couple of classes that they needed to be taught. And so I just happened to be at the right spot at the right time, and that led then into a tenured position. And lo and behold, here I am today. And so that's kind of the shortened version of the story, John.
Yeah, no, really, I'm always fascinated, and that's sort of how we got around to having these discussions is how do we get into different fields? And I find it very interesting I know my introduction to sport, same as yours, is through school, doing a physical education degree at Memorial. And then the different paths that can take. And I'm excited because I'm looking to talk to a number of different people that have gone down different roads, because everybody takes a different path. And then going the academia route is always, for me, interesting, because it is like it's not something that's for everybody, and everybody has that mind. And I give credit because, and I think also too, it's like one of those misunderstood things, because you're put on this island of like, oh, you're a professor, but then how much academia and the people that come out of that inform the work we all do, and also influence. It's like I look at why did we get here? It's because we took a course in university. Same thing, adaptive course. It's like just opened my eyes. It was just this one simple course, but now it's like led me down this other path. Like you, it's just fascinating. It's this circle and cycle.
The one class I teach right this semester is called an Introduction to Sport and Recreation Management, first year course for the sport and recreation management students. And I haven't taught this class in years, but I decided I wanted to get back into the first year cohort. So there's about 60 students, and every class I zoom in a alumni. And for 10 minutes, I get them to do kind of what you just did with me insofar as talking about the story. And then I bring in their LinkedIn account, and then we kind of trace the steps that students took. And I'm always amazed. And I think the students are actually really appreciating this. I think they are anyways. I'm showing them the zigs and the zags that people take. And, like there was a young lady who's now working in the IOC right now, and people were like, oh, that sounds incredible. But I said, okay, but look at the paths she took to get there. Like she was a border security guard, which I'm not saying was a bad job, but it wasn't the job she wanted. And that wasn't certainly the career path that she had envisioned when she started. But that was the opportunity that was presented to her at that time. And so she took it. And she was there for 2 years, but then zig back. And yeah, it's rarely linear. It's rarely sequential. It seems to kind of come in spits and spurts.
So you've obviously had a great path to where you've gotten here. Is there, as you look forward, is there anything that still excites you about the field and area that we're in now? Is there something that's like still, it's like, oh yeah, there's still more to do, or there's something that's like, that's what gets David Legg up in the morning? Besides your beautiful backgrounds.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. I think there's a couple of things. And, as a volunteer, I went down the road of board governance, and I was the president of the Canadian Paralympic Committee. I was on the International Paralympic Committee Sports Science Committee. And in the more recent, I'd say last 4 years, I've circled back actually to, I think, be a bit more community focused as opposed to more national or international. Now, there's probably a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the travel can be exhausting. And at that time in my life, I think that was difficult. The other piece of it is, and I think this is an interesting one from a disability context, I'm becoming very aware of my role as a person who is able-bodied. And I've seen a pretty dramatic shift in and I completely concur with this trend, is having individuals with lived experience taking on these leadership roles. And so even at the local level, where I was one of the founders of the Calgary Adapted Hub, I'm trying as best I can almost to pull away from that, and to be more, I would say, of an ally and a supporting individual, as opposed to leading from the front. And I still haven't quite figured that piece out yet. And I think that may be an evolving opportunity and challenge for me, kind of towards the twilight, I guess, of my career, is where do I fit within that context? Because I still think I have lots to give as a leader and perhaps as an influencer. And maybe that happens through my teaching in the area of adaptive physical activity. But I'm also very conscious of trying to create leadership, not me to create leadership, but to support leaders that have the lived experience, and to, and again, I'm not really sure I'm using the right words, but to take a back seat or to step aside, but I'm trying to ensure that the person with the lived experience is the one at the front making the decisions and leading. And I want to try and be as supportive as I can. And I think there's this transition that we're going through, perhaps socially, in many, many other areas, including within adaptive physical activity, where people are trying to figure that out, and where they fit in the hierarchy, and where they fit in what they can contribute and how they can contribute.
Yeah, I always find that fascinating. And it's when you're trying to do something that hasn't necessarily been done before, it's that, okay, well, how do we make it happen? Because it hasn't been done before. But you don't want that to stop you from trying it or empowering people, because, all right, well, how are they supposedly if they haven't been given the opportunity? It's like, yeah, you can't criticize them for not having the experience because they hadn't been given that opportunity. And it's, I love that, and I think that's really exciting. And I know in the work that we've done together the past couple of years, I think that's the piece that has excited me too. It's that, and it's just I love when you talked about that community side of things. So I think that's what I've really seen. It's just like that crossroads of rec, physical activity, sport, social work, and like it's just the things that are happening there. I think, okay, I think there's some huge opportunity there, and I think it's just that piece of like, yeah, it's just this melting pot there's some really cool things starting to bubble up and be created, and I love it.
I think too, I've pulled a little bit away from trying to cure cancer, like to solve all the world's problems at once, and to think that that's going to be my legacy. And I think now I'm feeling actually far more comfortable in acknowledging the little wins, and trying to address as many of those as you possibly can. And so, if there's one student that graduates from my class who becomes a leader in adaptive physical activity, or at least has a different mindset, if there's one family that we can introduce to a sport in the Calgary region that perhaps they didn't know about in the past, and somehow then that brings their family closer together because they can participate in sport and recreation as a family more often. Like, I think those are the wins now where I'm taking greater satisfaction than I might have in the past, where when I was a bit younger, I perhaps had more grandiose hopes. And I hope I'm not coming across and saying that I'm now less ambitious or aspirational. I think it's just, it's different. And I'm, like some of the stuff that we did with the kind of provincial group, I have to admit, like, to me, I think I found the greatest gratitude and satisfaction in when, like, little clubs would kind of think, hey, we're going to become inclusive now, or we're going to at least try to become more inclusive. And how do we do that? And who can we connect with? And if, you or I were able to kind of put them in touch with the right people, to me, that's what we needed to do. And that to me was then I'm like, okay, we're doing something here, and we're doing something good. And I think, back to, when you and I were emailing each other about doing this talk, I think sport and physical activity and recreation has so much power and so much potential good in it. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's cons and there's flaws too, and it's not perfect. But I still think we had our students in my adapted class yesterday talking about where they did their practicums, and the stories that they were talking about of the interactions between them and the child and the parents, and the student and the parents, and just those connections. Like, again, it made my heart flutter. Like, I loved hearing about these young 19, 21, 22-year-olds starting to make those connections and see the opportunities that were ahead of them professionally and as volunteers. And it's through sport. Now, again, maybe there are other conduits that can do this as equally as well, but I don't know about them. And I didn't experience them myself. So I've only got my own kind of perspective on that. But I do see sport, recreation, and physical activity and leisure as having a real opportunity to do good. And I think that's what continues to drive me to stay involved in it.
So now, and to sort of try and encapsulate all that into, what's your elevator pitch for your students? You got your 60 seconds on, okay, well, why should they consider working in this field? Like if someone's thinking about what's an area I can go into? What is your pitch to that student?
So I think my pitch is twofold. Number one, it's that there is a tremendous opportunity out there. So it's not a mature industry whereby you're coming into it and kind of everything that's been done has been done. This is one that just has so many options and opportunities to be entrepreneurial, innovative, creative, that a person can leave their mark. A person can still come in and create and do something personalized. So I think that to me is the one thing that would be attractive. And the second is, at its foundation, is doing like really positive, important, influential stuff at the individual level. And so, you know, it's not a global crisis we're addressing it at the micro level that I guess ultimately can provide, you know, global consequences and global influence. But truly at its root, you're dealing with the individual and trying to try to make their lives better. And, you know, again, that maybe sounds a bit Pollyannish and I don't know, maybe a bit soapy, but that to me is what attracted me to it. And so if there are people like me, then, or similar to me, then that's how I try to encourage them or motivate them to consider this as an opportunity.
That's awesome. So now, David, I know this is probably the hardest question I have for you, which is, I want your story. What's that one story for you that sticks out for you over your years of sport? That it's like, okay, that encapsulates sort of why you do what you do, and just keep doing what you're doing.
Oh, that's a tough one. Let me think about that for a second. There's a couple that came to mind right away, but the one I'll tell is when I was doing my master's at Windsor, and I saw in the local newspaper, this is pre-internet, that there was a wheelchair rugby. I think it was actually still called murder ball at the time in Windsor, anyways. And they were having it practice at a community center not far from where I was living. And so I thought, I'm gonna go check this out. And I showed up as a volunteer. I had never seen the sport. I didn't know anybody there, but I was new to Windsor. I didn't really connect with anybody. And these guys saw me walk in. And I'm like, hi, I'm here to volunteer. And they said, okay, you can ref. And I'm like, well, I don't even know what I'm watching. Like, how can I ref? How can I officiate? They're like, well, basically, we just need you to go get the ball when it goes out of bounds. And, we just need you to, I don't know, do stuff for us. We'll tell you what to do. And so that's how I got my start officiating in wheelchair rugby. And I would basically blow the whistle when I would look at people and I'd be like, you did something wrong, because I can just tell by your face, but I have no idea what it was that you did wrong, but I know you did something wrong. And so I would blow the whistle and I'd point at them and they'd be like, what's your call? I'm like, I don't know what. And so I learned by asking and them telling me. And to me, that was my introduction. And they embraced me. They allowed me to come into their community. I got in the chair and would play with them, and they didn't treat me certainly any differently. They tried to knock me out of my chair just as much as they knocked each other out of their chairs. And that was they embraced me. And I think that led to an understanding and it opened a Pandora's box for me, insofar as, this underworld of disability sport that I had no idea was there. It was like Fight Club. Nobody talked about it. And all of a sudden I'm like, ooh. But then I was like, they're like, don't talk about this to anybody. I'm like, come on. And it just was suddenly an awakening almost to a system that was previous to that completely unknown to me.
That's awesome. All right, David. Now this is my gotcha question. This is the one that's going to finish us off. This is the one that's going to go viral. and I didn't send it to you in advance. So you're known to be a connoisseur of holiday ice cream, correct? So now, as I've learned going through the ice cream section, there are several different types of holiday ice cream and candy cane ice cream. Some chocolate, some none, some not. If you were to pick your one that you had to sell people on holiday ice cream, what's the you don't have to give brands if you don't want to, but like what is the flavor profile and what's the composition?
So, okay, if I'm being honest with you, I have been accused of being loyal to a fault. And I particularly like President's Choice candy cane ice cream. And it's the one that I started with. I haven't tried any of the others. So I have no comparison point, and I don't want to. I married my wife, and I don't want to know what else is with her. She's my wife, and she's always going to be my wife. My ice cream is my ice cream. It's always going to be my ice cream. My Pittsburgh Steelers are my Pittsburgh Steelers, no matter how badly they suck. They will still be my team. I am loyal to a fault. The analogy to my wife may not have been a great one, but I think you get my. I think you get my point. I stick with what I know, and I'm wearing my golf shirt with a sport logo on it. I'm like Steve Jobs. This is what I wear every day. Pair of khaki pants, golf shirt with a sport logo on it. I am consistent to a fault, and that's just the way I like it.
That is awesome, and all I have to say, it's much less painful eating the ice cream right now than it is watching the Steelers at this point. So I'm glad you still have your ice cream.
Yeah, me too.
David, thank you so much. This was awesome. Everything that I could have hoped for. I appreciate your perspectives. Definitely appreciate your time and your friendship, and look forward to connecting many times again soon.
My pleasure. Thanks.
All right.